Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mill Valley Historical Society's first online First Wednesday presentation, which ironically is being held on a Thursday night because of last night's vice presidential debate. My name is Deborah Schwartz, and I'm on the board of directors for the Mill Valley Historical Society, and I'm in charge of the First Wednesday speaker series and the oral history program. I'm so happy to see you all. It's always been my hope that our First Wednesday speaker series program offered a familial community experience where neighbors and friends could gather together in a common area, and we could learn from each other and support each other. And the Mill Valley Public Library has provided the physical space for that to happen for years. And now the library is providing a virtual space as well. So thanks to the Mill Valley Public Library for allowing us to continue our speaker series in a safe and accessible way. And we look forward to returning on a regular basis starting in 2021. And to those of you out there who are already members of the Historical Society, thank you for your support. And if you're not yet a member, we hope you will be soon. Our memberships are so affordable and just a click away on our Mill Valley Historical Society website. Tonight's talk is titled Fire on the Mountain, Prehistory, History, and the Future of Wildfire in Marin with Mike Swezy. Now, this is our first ever online event, and I'm a little nervous about it. However, less nervous knowing that helping us to manage this event is Natalie Snoyman and her assistant, Julianne Randolph. On behalf of the Historical Society, I'm delighted to share that Natalie is the library's new history librarian. She comes highly qualified. She's curious, she's organized, and we are just so delighted to have her as part of the team. Natalie is essential to our work as historians. She acts as a conduit to the library. She assists us in our research and with our oral histories. She's a resource for us and for you. Thank you, Natalie and Julianne, for helping tonight, and we look forward to many future collaborations. According to the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, this year, as of October 2nd, a total of 8,155 fires have burned, and over 4 million acres of land burned alone this year, making 2020 the largest wildfire season recorded in California's modern history. And we know it. This is a scary time. When I first moved to Mill Valley in 1979, I trained to be a volunteer firefighter while also attending an EMT class at College of Marin. I felt then, and I still feel now, that it's important to be prepared for natural and medical emergencies. One day I asked my station captain, where do you begin in a true emergency, like an earthquake or firestorm? And he said, you start where you stand. You start where you stand. And that is exactly what we are doing tonight. We are taking a good hard look at the history of wildfire in Marin, how and why fire spreads, how and why fires have changed over time, along with projections into the future, and with practical tips to stay engaged, informed, and up to date with what's going on in our community in regard to fire concerns. Mike Swezy is a California registered professional forester and worked as a consultant and served on fire crews with the U.S. Forest Service. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Forestry from UC Berkeley and a Master of Science in Fire Ecology from the University of Washington. For 23 years, Mike worked for the Marin Municipal Water District as the Watershed Manager, protecting watershed lands on Mount Tamalpais and West Marin, directing projects to reduce fire risk and safeguard Mount Tam's biological diversity. It was Mike's dream job to take care of Mount Tam. He had an incredible staff with people who felt their work was their calling. One of Mike's favorite projects was to decommission old dirt roads and in doing so, reconnect natural habitats. Prior to working at the MMWD, Mike worked as an ecologist for the California State Parks, developing forest restoration plans and participating in the statewide prescribed fire team. In the early 80s, he helped create Marin Conservation Corps, now Conservation Corp North Bay. And in 2014, he was awarded Marin Conservation League's Green Award for Environmental Leadership for his efforts to create the Tamalpais Lands Collaborative, AKA 1TAM. He served on FIRESafe Marin's board of directors for 10 years, including 3 as president. Mike is now vice president of the Marin Conservation League and is co-chair of the Fire and Environmental Working Group. He lives in Fairfax with his wife, Susan. Mike's talk will last about 45 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A. For practical purposes, hosts can speak, but attendees are muted. But at the bottom of your screen, you will find the small Q&A box to type in your questions, which then I will relay to Mike. After the Q&A, we'll close with Natalie sharing some important links and ways to share this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, it really is my honor to hand this show over to Mike Swezy. Mike?
Okay, well, that was a pretty involved introduction. Thank you, Deborah. And thanks to Natalie and Julianne at Mill Valley Library. Thanks, they invited me to speak to you all and help put this together. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'll do my best to make this interesting. The purpose of today's talk is to explain the roots of our current wildfire crisis, the current events that drive it, and some actions we can all take to make ourselves safe and reverse the course. I have a background in fire management, working for various public agencies over my working life, but currently I'm embarked on a new career as a volunteer conservation advocate serving with Marin Conservation League. And I'm flying under MCL's colors today. You can see them behind me. Marin Conservation League has a long history of advocating for land preservation in Marin and has recently broadened its efforts by forming 2 new action committees, the Climate Action Working Group and the Fire and Environment Working Group. Please check us out at marinconservationleague.org. So here are the topics for the presentation today. But first, a disclaimer. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not a historian. I'm somewhat of a scientist in that I've studied natural science, and I do have a master's degree in science. But I was drawn to ecology because of my love for nature, and also because, as one of my professors said, ecology is a science, yeah, it's the overstatement of the obvious. Pretty far removed from hard science like chemistry. But there's no escaping chemistry. And so this is the beginning of your fire science and ecology lesson. It'll be brief. Wildfire is the ultimate decomposer, and it's a powerful catalyst for ecological change and now possibly social change. We'll talk about that. Essentially, heated wood releases some of the cellulose in the wood as a gas. It ignites in the atmosphere, and it gives us these byproducts: water, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and carbon and nitrogen. Wildfires contribute approximately 20% of the world's CO2 emissions. So it's a big player in the CO2 game. And here's the fire triangle. This is any firefighter, the first hour of their training, this is what they get, because they need to know what makes fire go. But more importantly, they need to know how to put out a fire. So knocking out any one of the legs of the triangle puts out a fire. For instance, if you remove fuel in front of the flaming front, the fire goes out because it doesn't have anything more to burn. Likewise, if you have a kitchen fire and you use your fire extinguisher, you remove all the oxygen from the fire and you extinguish it. So pretty useful stuff. But then we got to move that fire to the natural environment, and this is where things get tricky. There's a lot of variability out there, but some of the take-home messages from this slide is topography, that fire burns uphill. The steeper the hill, the faster it burns. Fuel's a big deal. How much is there, how it's arranged. Really important is how much moisture is in it. But those are kind of given any one fire event. Weather is a big driver of fire behavior. And I would say that wind and relative humidity, all things being equal, are very significant in that regard. So here's a simple model of a fire. They never look like this, but it helps explain how they move. Fire has direction and it has magnitude. And at the front of the fire is where it's most intense. The flame lengths are the largest. And at the back of the fire, those are the least intense. And that's where most firefighting begins, at the back of the fire, moving along the flanks. And on the flanks, you have variable fire intensity, but generally less than the head of the fire. And you see that arrow that says mean direction of wind, which is pushing this fire forward. You could substitute mean direction of upslope, and it would have the same profile. But again, in nature, it's never a perfect oval like this. It responds to the fuels and the topography in front of it and driven by the weather. So here's some fire terminology. This kind of reflects the intensity of fire. Ground fire is burning in the needles on the ground. Surface fire is when it's starting to burn brush and surface fuels. As it gets more intense, it might want to climb into the smaller trees and what do we call ladder fuels that allows the flames to climb into the crown or the forest canopy. Once it's in the canopy and driven by wind, we get what's called a stand replacing fire, which basically means that everything's burned to the ground. But in reality, between that ground fire and the stand replacing fire, you get a lot of different behavior, even on a single fire. And the severity of the fire in terms of ecological impacts can be mixed as well. But as far as how the fire spreads in its danger, spot fire and embers are really important things to consider. So as you see in this diagram, as an individual tree crowns torches and sends flames into the atmosphere, it creates a little convection column. And that heat column can draw burning embers and firebrands into it and send it forward in front of the flaming front. So this is how fires spread in more intense situations. And when you've got a big wind-driven thing and you've got a crown fire going, these firebrands and embers can fly miles in some cases. And when you have a lot of these embers landing all at once, creating lots of little fires, little spot fires, you have a mass ignition and you have a firestorm. So this is how these bigger events travel forward in advance of the flaming front. And just to make things a little more tricky here in California, we have these offshore winds that happen when there's a high pressure system off the interior of the West, and the winds go across the mountains. We call them up here the Diablo winds. In Southern California, the Santana winds. And they have this ability to drive fires downhill. And so most of our big fire events happen during these big windstorm events. And there's an interaction between the topography and the fire in the coastal ranges, particularly, which can make really dramatic fire behavior. And all of this activity, these hot, dry winds, come when the fuels, both the live fuels and the dead fuels are at their seasonal moisture low. So it's really, this is why September and October fires in California, and I guess now November fires are so terrible. Okay, now that's the end of your fire lesson. Now we're moving forward into your ancient history before humans. The first evidence in the fossil record of carbon from fires is about 425 million years ago. And we had this about the same time that terrestrial vegetation showed up on the Earth. And then we had all sorts of reasons before humans started fires. There were all kinds of natural or non-human sources of ignition, mostly lightning, but volcanoes, coal seams, rock falls that cause sparks to fly, spontaneous combustion, and even meteors are noted in the literature. And we see the effects of this long history of fire in vegetation and all the fire adaptations, sprouting being one. Most woody plants in California are able to sprout. For instance, coast live oak, you can burn all the leaves off the tree and the next year it'll sprout new leaves. There's a lot of reproductive strategies that plants employ. One that's really common in chaparral is you have annuals that have a seed bank in the soil that lie dormant until the big catastrophic fire burns off the shrub canopy, and you see these great blooms after chaparral fires. All sorts of plants have seed that are germinated, the germination is stimulated by smoke. We have trees with thick bark, notably our redwoods that are sometimes thousands of years old, they're that old because they've been able to withstand fire. They've seen a few fires and they have thick bark and an ability to sprout as well. So they're very fire hardy. The picture in the background here is a knobcone pine. It's one of those pines that the seed's not released from the cone until the cone's heated by fire. So this is a strategy for a stand replacing fire where the mother trees are gone, but the seeds are ready to get to work. So serotiny, I love that term. And my other favorite term is lignotubers. Lignotubers are swellings of the root crown at or just below the soil level that's packed with buds and food resources. So again, when that fire sweeps through and kills all the above ground branches, the plant's ready to sprout and get back in the game. So there's a lot of adaptations. This is just some of them that are common, and many of these are common for California species. So we're launching 424 million years forward, and hominids are on the scene. The first evidence of use of fire by Homo erectus shows up in the fossil evidence 1 million years ago. And then along come Homo sapiens. You must have heard of them. Their use of fire shows up in the fossil record starting with good evidence around 125,000 years ago. Again, I'm not an archaeologist, but I can Google with the best of them. So this was a widespread and profound ecosystem influence. Imagine how many generations of plants are subjected to human interaction with fire. I'm going to introduce a new concept that ecologists use to describe and classify how fire behaves in a plant community, a plant type. First, it's how intense is the fire? What kind of fire type is it? Are they large size or small size fires? Season of occurrence, frequency, spatial patterns of the fire, and that sort of thing. But mostly we're looking at intensity and frequency. Some good examples are, we've all heard of the Ponderosa pine forest, where John Muir said he could gallop a horse through. That was maintained by low intensity, frequent surface fires that kept the stand open and maintained that stand structure of large trees widely spaced. Compare that to a chaparral fire regime where it doesn't burn very often, but when it does, boy, it really burns good. It burns everything to the ground. So that's more of a long interval stand replacing fire regime. So those are just two examples of fire regimes. And there's everything in between. And just to make it even trickier again for our California scene, we live in this really special place to live in the world, this Mediterranean climate where it's just a joy to live. Who would want to live anywhere else? I know you're tired of the smoke, but think about it. We live in this where the winters are mild. Yeah, it rains, but we don't have to shovel snow. And we get these great summers where we don't have to worry about rain. However, that long summer drought promotes fires. So all of these areas, Chile, Mediterranean, Australia, South Africa, they are fire environments. So now we're going into the more recent prehistoric era, since the last ice age about 12,000 years ago, that the receding of the of ice allowed for people to come from Asia into North America. And when they got here, we have pretty much the same plant assemblages as we do now. And they brought with them the fire as a tool. And in coastal California, we don't have the lightning, although we just got the lightning in August, but we don't have it like they do in the Sierra Nevada. But there were no fire departments back then, so a little bit of lightning went a long way. So how do we know the Native Americans used fire? One of the pieces of evidence we have is from tree rings and fire scars. And if you look at long-lived trees that can survive fires, like ponderosa pine or giant sequoia or redwoods, coast redwoods, when a fire comes through, it can sear the cambium, the outer growing edge of the tree, and the tree has this ability to grow around it and seal up those burnt faces. And so when you go back and look at the tree ring history, you can count backwards and see the year in which a fire happened. So this is from a giant sequoia, but I will give you a report from work that was done on Bolinas Ridge on Water District property, where they went back about 400 years and have a pretty good evidence of fire frequency prehistoric, before the Europeans arrived. And let me see if I can get my exact notes. So the summary is that we had small fires in that environment each 10 acres saw fire every 4 to 10 years. And so this was sampled over the whole Kent Lake Basin. But if you look at every sample that was taken and the whole tree ring chronology that was built by all of those samples, there was a fire pre-1800 almost every single year. So that's evidence of Native American use of fire. And that's a lot of fire in the environment. So how else do we know? This is a great work by Kat Anderson where she's interviewed a lot of Native Americans, and it really portrays the kind of intimate and sophisticated stewardship that Native Americans had with the environment. And they were here for thousands of years. And this is a graphic from that book that shows all of the different types of plants and all of the uses that were where Native Americans made use of California's bounty. But some of the things they did to use fire for was to promote resprouts of basketry material, to improve wildlife habitat, to drive game during hunting efforts, reduce the loss of acorn crops to fungus, and to make it easier to gather acorns. And we'll talk about tan oak in detail, but tan oak and that redwood forest on Bolinas Ridge are the two dominant species. And Native Americans favored tan oak as a food of all the acorns. It's a large nut, and they're very productive. And so I am supposing, on archaeologists that that's a big part of what that fire regime was to help in the gathering of acorns. Now there's also other Native Americans that use fire, and it's thought that the Great Plains were managed by fire for centuries to support the buffalo there. And there's an interesting study that was published in the Journal of Quaternary Science Reviews, which posits that the genocide of millions of Native Americans contributed to the Little Ice Age that took place between 16th and 19th centuries. After the European colonizers arrived here with disease such as smallpox, it was estimated that 90% of the Native Americans perished. And as a result, there was a reduction in the use of fire, and the whole eastern seaboard became more of a treescape, and it caused the reduction of temperatures because there was less emissions from carbon and more, from fire, and more tree growth that was sequestering carbon. So it didn't account for the entire Little Ice Age, but there is now science that suggests that it contributed significantly. Okay, now we're leaping across European settlement in the interest of getting to the fire story. And this is a picture of a redwood logging episode. You can see three people down in the gulch there just for scale. But as the Europeans came across the US, there was considerable amount of exploitation of natural resources. We know about the mining and the grazing and the timber practices and damming of rivers. And one thing that was happening at this time of exploitation, there was a lot of logging going on, and there was fairly indiscriminate use of fire, and wildfires were fairly common. And this book documents one of the biggest fires ever in America, the Big Fire, and it changed the course of history, and I'll explain that. So this was the Great Fire of 1910 that burned 3 million acres in Idaho, Montana, and Washington jointly, and it caused 87 fatalities. It was a horror show. There was towns that got burned over. It was a complete and utter disaster, and it led to some changes, politically. One of those changes was the passage of the Weeks Act, which allowed for the federal government to purchase lands for forest reserves to be managed by the U.S. Forest Service, which was led at that time by Gifford Pinchot. And here is Gifford Pinchot standing. This is in Marin. This is, and the gentleman sitting in the middle there is William Kent, who donated lands to the federal government that became ultimately Muir Woods. He also, as a congressman representing Marin, he co-authored the language that birthed the National Park Service. And that gentleman on the left, John Muir, we know all about John Muir. So this period this is the progressive era at the turn of the last century, and it was marked by the advent of public lands, forest reserves, national parks. The idea of public water was born, and you saw the development of antitrust legislation, and women got the vote. Rich time politically, and a lot of good work happened then. And along with that policy change, this was the advent of the fire suppression era. So there was, because of that horrific fire, the Great Fire, 1910, the policies came forward that required federal agencies to aggressively suppress fires. And so there was the technology and the forces developed to do that, but also there was a campaign led by this fellow, Smokey the Bear, where essentially fire was demonized. It was the evil to the beautiful nature that we enjoyed. And we got really good at putting out fires. And things were looking better. There was less of these destructive fires until the paradox happened where we got so good at putting out fires that vegetation amassed in the landscape and we started seeing other fires that were destructive. Is this going to work? Yes. Okay, so this is a little video clip from FIRESafe Marin's website, which does a chronology of 100 years of fires in Marin from the early part of the 19th century, the 20th century to the early part of this century. And you'll see basically the chronology is a lot of little fires leading to the end of this chronology where you're starting to see a lot of big fires. It's kind of a fun little thing. So, and it's to the tune of the TV show Bonanza. So that was fun, huh? Okay, so this is some of those fires you saw in more of a static piece here, but beginning with the 23 fire, this started in Ignacio and burned all the way across down to the backside of Mount Tam. It burned to the edge of Fairfax, edge of San Anselmo, edge of Kent Woodlands, but Kent Woodlands wasn't there then. But that was nearly 40,000 acres. It was a wind-driven event, just like we talked about earlier. So that fire may be a precedent for future fires in Marin. Soon after that, we have down here at the bottom here, we see a smaller fire, but a very destructive fire in terms of loss of houses, the 1929 fire, Great Fire, Mill Valley. And then the other big fire is the Mill Fire, and from 1945, it started at near Peters Dam on Kent Lake, near Kent Lake, and burned, again, driven by a north and northeast wind. It burned all the way to the edge of Stinson Beach, all the way up to the north slope of Tam, and again, Fairfax and San Anselmo were spared because the winds died. And that's typically how these big wind-driven events. I'll just note that the last flash you saw on that Bonanza video was the Vision Fire, which was 12,000 acres. And what we didn't see was the most recent, the Woodward Fire in Point Reyes Seashore that burned right up to the edge and overlapped somewhat the Vision Fire. So those are the last big fires in Marin. I just want to note that this interaction of topography and the Diablo winds may have some predictive value. Here is the Hanley Fire in the gray that started to the east and followed through the same topography as the Tubbs Fire. And, you know, maybe not with the same ferocity, but you know, it still was an intense burn. The difference was in 1964, there were hardly anybody living in the hills, and the Coffee Park neighborhood that was burned over in the Tubbs Fire didn't exist. But so this is just a note that, you know, that we see fires repeat in similar locations. So that's where history might be useful. Here's the 29 fire. It started just some locations here. You can see the railroad grade going across the mountain here. And look here at Summit Avenue. I just want you to remember this point because you'll see a graphic later. Here's downtown Mill Valley. And you're going to see a picture in the next slide here of a home that was burned over. So this fire, let me get you the stats. It burned 117 homes. But that same footprint today, it would be more than 1,100 homes. The fire burned over 2,500 acres, about the same size as the Oakland Hills Tunnel Fire in 1991 that burned 3,500 homes, less than 20 miles away. So, you know, can't predict the future, but, you know, there is some risk here. And this is the Herman family as they came home. The Hermans lived at, I forgot their address. Dagnabbit. Oh, 409 McGee Avenue, which is those that live in Mill Valley. I bet you know that's not too far from downtown. So what's remarkable is just the sad faces here and we see this over and over again, where people arrive at their burned over home and all they see are smoking foundations and all material evidence of their life, all their treasures, all their memories are completely gone. And it's really sad to see this. So that's just history. 1945 fire burned about 20,000 acres. And again, came close to residences. It might, same footprint, wind driven could cause loss of life and property in Marin. Here's what the 45 fire, the Mill Fire, looked like from San Francisco. That big convection column where big firestorms, you know, are evident because of that. Excuse me. Here's the Kent Lake Basin before Kent Lake was there. This is the 45 fire where it was old growth redwood, got logged, burned a couple times, and had a stand replacing fire. We're going to revisit this site in the future. Here's you know, a lot of my stuff is from the Water District because I worked there for a while. So I have a lot of slide decks. But here's a vegetation map of the Tam watershed. And what I want you to look at is just the diversity of habitats that are there, just the sheer numbers of vegetation types, and then look at the complexity of how it's arranged across the landscape. So it's something that's really valuable, we all appreciate, and this landscape was shaped largely by frequent fires. And so we are seeing, with fire suppression, we're seeing some changes. So again, you know, the model we all know about is low intensity, frequent fire in Ponderosa Pine Forest, where you could gallop a bunch of horses through there. The fires maintain that open structure. But what's happening in Marin's vegetation types? Sierra Nevada gets all the press, but we got stuff going on here too. We have this redwood and Douglas fir forest. We have a little bit of old growth left in Marin in Muir Woods, and that forest type is probably, the old growth is in pretty good shape. Those big trees are fire hardy, and the lack of fire is probably within the normal variation that they've seen over the eons. But we have these second growth forests out in the Kent Lake Basin and elsewhere that were, you know, they're second growth, they're smaller trees, where the tan oak that came back is creating this novel ecosystem. And we're going to revisit this one in a little bit. But, you know, there's a different kind of fire hazard here than in the old growth. Other vegetation types, mixed evergreen and oak woodlands, the same kind of fire frequency, maintains kind of an open condition. And in the absence of fire, you start to see Douglas fir invading these oak woodlands, where decades old Douglas fir can penetrate the canopy and overtop hundreds of year old oaks and shade them out, create a different fuel profile that create more intense fire that could damage trees more, and add to that the susceptibility of live oak and black oak to sudden oak death. You have you know, a vegetation type at risk. Chaparral is, in terms of conservation, you know, they're probably in good shape. Chaparral's this long interval, high intensity fire Chaparral is not a species, it's an amalgamation of manzanita and chamise and ceanothus and scrub oak. And as we mentioned before, when it burns pretty well. And they have all kinds of strategies for reproducing themselves. So in terms of developing resiliency, chaparral, if you get too much fire in chaparral, as they see in Southern California, you're starting to see invasion by grasses, start to see type conversion. You see a loss of the biological values that are in chaparral. So moving out of the wildlands into our neighborhoods, this is a historic photo of a neighborhood in Mill Valley. And I guarantee you the same view has more houses, more vegetation in the neighborhoods, both planted and native vegetation. We have narrow roads, steep terrain. We have a community, and this is just representative of all the communities that surround Mount Tam in the wildland-urban interface. Corte, Madera, Larkspur, Ross, San Anselmo, Fairfax, San Geronimo Valley. We have all these same conditions. And just to put an exclamation point on the fire threat, this is the CPUC's map that identified where priority work should happen for PG&E to maintain fire safety along their electrical lines. And you see that we have our share of the extreme tier 3 topography landscape in Marin, and you'll notice see the green outline in that blow up is the outline of the water district's boundary. I stole this slide from them, but you see outside that green line is the developed community. So we're living in that high risk area, and so we had pretty much, as I said, there were ecologists were concerned about fire suppression and its, the trajectory of that. Back in the 70s, but we didn't really see this coming, climate change. And so the effects of that relative to fire are generally, we're seeing a warmer climate and atmosphere that's putting stress on plants, shorter winters, which means actually a longer fire season. That summer drought period has extended by some estimates as much as 70 days. We're seeing more extreme weather events that can drive fire weather. We have this long-term drought thing happening, and all those add up to bigger, hotter fires. Here's a slide I used to show a lot when I was working because it was a noteworthy time. This is aerial photography of the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada, and this was that long-term drought we had 2012. We were bailed out of this in the winter of 2016, 2017 with a good rainfall year. So I stopped using this slide because we thought we were out of the drought, but not so. We are in the midst of a mega drought. Mega droughts are occasional events of unusual severity lasting for at least 20 years. During the past 1,200 years, 4 major mega droughts occurred in the American West. During the 800s, the mid 1100s, the 1200s, and the late 1500s. The current one is already at least as bad and could get worse, as bad as the worst one on record, and could continue. Scientists estimate that 50% of the drought's magnitude is driven by climate change. Further, California's climate change assessment predicts large fires, including mega fires of 100,000 acres or more, will likely increase by 50%, and acreage burned by at least 77% by the end of this century, unless CO2 emissions are dramatically curtailed. These are average year. Obviously, we're not in an average year. And then there's the problem post-fire. And this is the Thomas fire where, the fire's out finally and everything's getting cleaned up, and the first winter big rainstorm comes and the hillside washes down, the double whammy. Those debris flows went from the hill slopes all the way to 101. They had to dig out 101. So I'm not a geologist either, but there are steep chaparral-laden slope above Mill Valley and other communities in Marin. So this is a possibility for us too post-fire. So another issue to deal with. So here we are in the midst of this calamity. This is the map from Tuesday, the map of all the action all of the fires that have occurred this year in Northern California. And I'll just note that the August complex, this thing up here, has eclipsed 1 million acres and probably is going to continue growing and continue burning until the winter rains come. So, wow. And then here's the summary. Deborah mentioned it. This is as of Tuesday. We're over 4 million acres. We had 8,300 fires. We've lost 31 lives. Almost 9,000 structures have burned. And if you add Oregon and Washington, there's another 1.5 million acres burned there. So basically a horror show. And this is the pyrocumulus cloud above the creek fire taken from a commercial airline. This fire, this column went 50,000 feet in the atmosphere. It kind of looks like the pictures we've seen of atomic bombs. And a colleague of mine who was looking at the fuels that were on the ground and the acreage that were covered and the amount of energy released by this kind of catastrophic fire, he's saying, yeah, that's about as much energy release as an atomic bomb. So one of the questions we hear these days is this the new normal? And I really think that's not the right question. And I'm saying this realizing how daunting all of this is for us, that we're facing these fires. And if we're not facing fires, we're enveloped in smoke. We have COVID to deal with. We have this crazy political world that we're engaged with. It's extremely stressful, and it's really easy to get down about it. New normal, it would be nice if we could level off and have something normal, but I'm not sure that's the case. But I want to give you some hope. So first thing you should know is all of the land management agencies in Marin County are doing really good work to make their natural areas more resilient. Plus, they're involved with work to make the community safe. So I'm doing the water district part of the deal, but county parks, state parks, national parks are all involved with vegetation management and spending millions of dollars a year in doing so. So you see here, that red line is the primary fuel break that the district built and maintains, and it's aligned with where people are. So it's intended to be part of the defense of the community. But I want to temper that with a little bit. Remember when I said, I showed you the 29 fire and looked at Summit Avenue? So here's Summit Avenue. This is railroad grade. This is our fuel break along railroad grade. And we've been managing that for 25 years. And this is some of our planning. The purple is looking at houses whose defensible space is within 300 feet of our ownership. So those are people who could be impacted. But there's these yellow spots are the footprint of structures. There's a GIS layer that we have that shows you where every structure in the county is. And you'll see, this is the message I want you to get, is people look at the mountain and because of these fires, and they fear the mountain's gonna bring them fire. But the fear should be where your houses are, because there's no difference in this vegetation where the houses are embedded than the undeveloped area up here. So we'll get to that in a bit, but that's where the attention should be. Some of the novel things that are happening in wildlands is, I have one example, is in redwood forests in this basin, Kent Lake Basin, where it was burned by the 45 fire. It came back strong. Some of the redwoods survived, but we have a lot of second growth. And remember, this basin was logged. Tan oak came back because it likes canopy openings. But in 1995, along comes sudden oak death. And you have this fuel condition that's really a novel ecosystem. You have the tan oak that were in the canopy fall to the ground, put a lot of fuel there. You have the tan oak sprouts. They want to stay in the game, so they're sprouting, but they only last so long before another episode of SOD comes and they die. So you have this really unique fuel condition that probably didn't exist even 30 years ago. So the Water District embarked on a project to see what we could do to create some fire resiliency. So we sent these light on the land little munchers to grind up all that tan oak to create a more safe fire condition, to reduce the fuel profile, and really hopefully accelerate this second growth forest to an old growth condition that's more fire hardy. There's a lot of studies going along with this work, including bird studies, pollinators. They're looking at soil moisture, carbon sequestration in the residual trees. A lot of work's going on, but definitely, we're measuring the fuel profile as well. But you can see that's pretty well done. People are asking about prescribed fire. There's a lot, you read a lot about that in the press these days, and I think, it's a great tool. We need more prescribed fire, but there's challenges. It's being close to developed communities, there's some risk there, so that's a challenge. Smoke is probably more significant because we are in an urban area, and there's, keeping smoke out of your living room is a challenge. Another big challenge is the availability of resources to do burns. The best time to do burning is usually end of the summer, early fall, and that's when we have our big fires, and we have lots of fire suppression resources committed, and so you need people, you need firefighters on hand when you're doing prescribed fire. But some of the good news around prescribed fire is there's new training collectives that are forming. There's recent legislation supporting more use of prescribed fire, reduction of liability for private landowners. There's these local prescribed burn teams that are forming in rural areas. So more funding for forest restoration, including prescribed fire. So most likely in Marin, it's continued to be used in grasslands and under oak woodlands because you can do these fires in one day and put them out and not have to worry about the smoke impacts at night. But there is some prospect in that those remote areas that are higher elevation away from the communities to use prescribed fire, for instance, underneath the redwood canopy. So what can you do personally? Yeah, you don't want leaves on your roof, and direct action is important. I love this. Looks like the wife's raising her hand down there below to catch this fella, but there's probably better ways to do that. I recommend you start at FIRESafe Marin. This is a treasure trove. FIRESafe Marin is a remarkable community resource. They have a ton of information. And the information that they have kind of reflects new thinking about firefighting is, and the idea is we're going from the inside out. The first is, know when fire risk is most acute, our red flag warnings. Be prepared, know how to escape, know where to escape to, make sure you have what you need when you go. The next thing you can do is make your house less ignitable. In terms of those embers that can ignite your roof or your siding or your leaves on the roof, get through your screens into your attic. And so there's a ton of information in FIRESafe Marin how to retrofit your house. Next step is defensible space to make your yard a place where a firefighter can defend your property from a wildfire. If you don't have good defensible space, it's not likely the firefighter is going to be able to get in there and safely do that work. And we're really promoting a lot of attention to making fire smart gardens that actually add ecological value, that you can provide pollinator plants, that you can do better job of managing soil health. So it's done in a way that, convert your yard to a fire safe yard, but consider making it an ecologically valuable yard at the same time. The next thing you can do is join a FireWise community. Marin County leads the nation in growth of FireWise communities. This is where neighborhoods get together and learn and act and get recognized for their planning. You can get involved with planning at a greater level. Maybe many of you know about this, but those that voted in March, over 70% of you approved Measure C, which funded the Marine Wildfire Prevention Authority, which is a joint powers authority that represents all the jurisdictions, almost all but 2 jurisdictions in Marin County, generating about $19 million a year to do some really good work. Increased fire safety inspections, better defensible space work, some fuel reduction projects, public education. Also note that there's senior exemptions. And then see in the middle of the button panel up here, ESP partnerships. This is a novel thing that folks in the Environmental and Climate Action Committee community developed this partnership with fire authorities where we're helping to implement MWPA projects in the best way possible regards environmental impacts, with the notion that the work could actually improve environmental conditions in the county. So we've got this thing going. There's dozens of people involved, and it really is a partnership between the fire service and environmental groups that could be a model for other communities. We have 3 committees, one looking at fuel reduction and how to promote habitat by doing that. We have a carbon resource management group that's looking at the best way to reduce carbon emissions and sequester carbon when we're, what do we do with all that vegetation that's being removed for fire safety? And finally, there's the group that's looking at, defensible space for ecological benefits. So a lot of work's going on in that regard. But I haven't talked about all the other fires that are going on, and I don't mention them all here. A big issue is loss of polar ice. It's accelerating, increasing sea level rise. In California, reduced snowpack is going to have huge implications for our water supplies. We are dependent on that snowpack. Storms, heat waves, all sorts of biological and ecological impacts. That could be a session unto itself. We talked about the drought. We're in for it. So, a lot of direct actions available in regards to fire safety, but to use Greta Thunberg's words, our house is on fire. We're up against it. And this, in my words, this is go time. We all need to use everything in our power to reverse the course of climate change, and that means your personal choices. And as a society, we need to invest massive resources to this effort. So it's important that we mobilize and secure leadership across the board that can get this needed work done. And I say the leadership has to happen at the local level as much as it does at the federal, state, and international level. But we all have to put our shoulder to the wheel. This beautiful blue orb that we live on deserves nothing else, nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Wonderful talk. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yay. Well, wonderful talk. Thank you for all that information. And also, thank you for reminding us all the things, all the actions we can take and all the ways that we can make changes daily in our lives. We're not victim to anything quite yet. And I think we have the opportunity to take action here as a community. I've got some questions here for you. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. This is from Barbara. Do you think there's a correlation between fire suppression and sudden oak death?
There was some people suggesting that there would be less sudden oak death if we had more fire in the environment. I don't think there's any studies that point to that, though. You know, the fire suppression has been going on for a long time. The sudden oak that's only been here in Marin since 1995.
Okay. Next question from Brian. As some people may know, that there's a Armando Quinteros has just been designated as the new California Director of Parks and Recreation. So his position at the Municipal Water District Board is now opened up. And this question refers to that. I believe this is District 2, which needs to be filled. What type of leadership do we need on the Municipal Water District, Marin Municipal Water District Board to manage, control the risk of fires?
Well, Armando was a great advocate for all things environmental and had a special affinity to Mount Tam. He was really instrumental in the development of One Tam, the collaboration that we now have between all the land management agencies. And so we need that continued keen support, somebody who understands watersheds and natural ecosystems, and you know, is steadfast in that support. You know, the watershed always has to compete with other infrastructure needs, and they are mighty. You know, we deliver a lot of water across a very rugged topography, but somebody that really understands water issues and nature. And Armando was, you know, there's other environmental advocates on the board, but Armando was the strongest. So hate to lose that strength there.
Mm-hmm. What are there parts of, this is from Brian again, are there parts of Mount Tam that are more likely to have wildfires than others?
Well, you know, we're always gaming where fires could start. Historically, there's been arsons fires, and you can't predict where those are going to be. There's power lines that cross the watershed, and those have been sources of fire starts. There's also the ability to look at where the fuel concentrations are, but fires can start anywhere. I don't know if there's one area that's more at risk. If you're talking about loss of life and property, you know, the closer you are to the fire, to the community, then those are more risky areas.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question from Steve. How does the invasive broom in Marin impact fire risk?
Well, you know, where it's been maintained and mowed and is short and green, it probably won't burn that well, but we have huge stands of what I would call old growth broom, and they sometimes die off and create their own fuel condition. And so these tall patches of broom with dead stuff in them that are growing underneath tree canopies, those are ladder fuels. Those are ripe for fire intensity. So yeah, I would say they would increase fire intensity versus what was there without that invasion. Plus that intense fire, they're going to have all their seeds in place. So post-fire, you're going to see more broom where it exists than where it exists now. It'll come back thicker than it was before. Let me say it that way.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Here's
from Richard. What would it take to restore fire to this landscape? Is it even possible?
Well, you know, we were talking about prescribed fire. I don't think you're going to be a situation where you can let, you know, have like a wilderness policy where you're letting fires go into the high country and stay there until the winter comes. Everything needs to be managed by fire suppression forces. We can't allow fires to go unmanaged, but prescribed fire is an option. And then there's proxies for fire. We showed some of them, and it doesn't have to be heavy equipment, but they're more efficient and less costly, but you can have hand crews do work. But again, it's going to, you know, I suppose, and this is sort of the case across all the agencies that do prescribed burning. Mostly it's in plant communities that have lower fuel loads in grasslands and oak woodlands, where it's safer to get the work done. So I don't think necessarily you could have fire return like we did in the past, but that certainly is a goal. And the more fire we have in the environment, I know I learned today at the fire in Point Reyes Seashore that a lot of the acreage of the ultimate fire size that was around 5,000 acres. There's probably a couple thousand acres that were burned as burnout operations, which is essentially is prescribed fire. So they kind of rounded out the shape of that fire and burning to secure fire lines. So that kind of thing is an opportunity, but that was way far away from developed communities. So there was some level of security in doing that.
Well, this next question really is, you partly answered it with your last question, with your last answer. Basically, this comes from Camille. Do you think widespread prescribed burning in a good fire program will ever really be feasible for Marin, given population density, air district regulations, low public tolerance of smoke, etc.?
That's my daughter, Camille. Thanks, Camille. I don't think, I think the opportunities are better in forested communities in rural areas than they are in an urban area like ours. But the more fire we have on the land, or the more proxies we have for fire, we're going to have a lower fuel condition. So the opportunity for more burning is going to be there. Burning can be expensive, but the larger the project, the less cost per acre. Air quality, I think there's a interest in the air quality management district to be more flexible, but smoke impacts too. I mean, we've all experienced it. It's a terrible thing, and prescribed fires can put a lot of smoke in neighborhoods. So it's a challenge. It's less likely to happen here than elsewhere.
Okay, here comes a question from Betsy. Can we consider clearing out in our yards much vegetation up to 10 feet understory as a partial substitute for controlled fire?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend putting a controlled fire in your yard. Absolutely not. So where you have trees that have limbs to the ground, it's a good idea to limb them up to 10 feet off the ground. So it's not, so if you do have a fire in your yard, it's not able to climb up the tree into the canopy and have more explosive fire behavior. So there's a lot of things you can do in your yard to reduce, fire risk. I recommend that you go to FIRESafe Marin and Marin Master Gardeners, UC Extension, and look at their materials. They have a lot of information available there. They're putting on training programs. They have webinars. If you're interested in making your yard fire safe, they're the folks to go to.
Here we have a question from Beverly. Is it time to move if your home is on the hills with only one exit road that has heavy vegetation?
Well, that's a personal choice. It's good that you're recognizing the risk, but that's a huge part of Marin. And living on the hill, you may have a view. So that's an extra bonus. So there are things that neighbors can do to reduce risk in neighborhoods, even on steep, hilly, windy road terrain. So I'm seeing it all over the place. My neighborhood in Deer Park, Cascade Canyon, there's just a whole ton of neighborhoods that are making their things safe. And if the fire does come, you're going to get warning. And if you're able to go early, don't wait. As soon as, it's even better to go when it's before it's mandatory. You have a sense that it's coming, go. If you wait to the last minute like everybody else, you're going to be in traffic. So I don't know, it's a personal choice. I like living where I live, but I'm in the wooey too.
Okay. Do you think that, this is from Stephen, do you think that the public is becoming more receptive to prescribed fires?
Well, you're certainly seeing a ton of newspaper articles and TV spots about prescribed burning. People are really curious, and it really speaks to that history that we had before the Europeans got here, where fire was abundant in the environment. But the other side of that was probably 4 million acres burned a year in California through lightning ignitions and Native Americans. We had 4 million acres of smoke through the whole summer season. So, you got to balance that. But people are seeing, hearing about this time in the past. There's no California future without fire. It's really kind of the choices we make about what kind of fire. But we're not going to get out of it overnight. It's going to take as long as it took to get into this. So we need to get busy. We need to be innovative, and we need investment. But it's going to take time to move the needle and make that transition.
Okay, a few more questions here. This is from Daniel. Should a wildfire start in a location like Baltimore Canyon between the Kent Woodlands and Mill Valley, how long would it take aircraft with fire retardants to arrive on the scene?
Gosh, I don't know. Minutes, potentially. It depends. I mean, there's a lot of contingencies there in your supposition, but they're coming from Santa Rosa. They can be here real quick. But there's probably some firefighters could write that in the Q&A and answer that question, that could answer that better than me. But yeah, they can get here in a hurry.
Okay, so here is from an anonymous. Oh, actually, her name is Anne. Is coast live oak considered a problem in the WUI?
It's not recognized as more fire prone than others, and it's certainly fire hardy. It can recover from fire. If you prune it up off the ground and clean the canopy, it's a perfectly acceptable tree in the environment. It's not recognized as one of the bad actors.
Okay, thank you very much. Now Michael asks, some areas of the Vision Fire seem to have come back with increased density. Fire didn't seem to restore the area to a low density kind of foliage. Why did this happen?
Well, you're talking about mostly the Bishop Pine Forest that has a different kind of reproductive strategy than the mixed conifer that we showed, or the redwood forest, or the oak woodlands. They typically, when a Bishop Pine Forest goes, it goes all at once. It's a stand replacing fire, and the cones are there and the seeds available, and it reproduces like mad. So it has a sort of a different life history as a plant community as it progresses. And what happened in the areas that were burned in the Vision Fire, you got a massive dog hair of Bishop Pine, where there was these, large single specimens, but fairly shrubby understory before. And without fire, those stands will, they'll kind of thin themselves out, and bigger trees will get established and the smaller trees die off. But what happened in the decades after that fire, we got pitch pine canker die off. So it made this thicket even worse because it had a big mortality episode. So it's in a fire prone effort. So when you're living next to those kinds of communities, it's really about, again, community protection, having fuel reduction on the margins of the community and making sure your neighborhood is fire smart. So that's where the work needs to happen, I believe, in those neighborhoods near the Vision Fire.
Robin asks, would the smoke be less for ground fires than any catastrophic fires?
The smoke from prescribed fires generally less smoke production, less particulate production. Those big stand replacing fires, those catastrophic fires, generate a lot of incomplete combustion and more particulate matter, and just a lot more of it. So those aren't necessarily comparable because prescribed burns are usually contained to, hundreds of acres or less, whereas these big fires are, we're looking at thousands or tens of thousands of acres.
Okay, I got just 3 more questions. This one is from Carol. Will Mike please mention ONE-TAM and EFM's current seminars?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. ONE-TAM is having a series of, they're called summits, and their focus is on climate change. And so what's today? Thursday? Each Thursday in October, so we had the second session today. They're having a focus on, it really focuses on climate change. The first Thursday was about equity and inclusion, and the one today was about forests. I forget the agenda for the rest, but you can go to, maybe we can put that on our, somebody could send us a link to the ONE-TAM Summit conference. A great program. Today's was, I thought was really good, especially. So that's through the month of October. Also, Environmental Forum, in place of their, their forum, their academy for people that want to learn how to be environmental advocates. They're doing kind of an online series. So go to Environmental Forum, to their website to sign up for their program. Really high quality work, and their focus is primarily climate change as well. So thank you, whoever recommended that. Those are 2 good online programs that you can take advantage of and learn quite a bit about local efforts. And as I said, I think our efforts should start at home first.
Okay, coming down to the last couple of questions. We have one from Tim. How common was fire before humans? Is it reasonable to suggest that we can reduce fire simply by improving human behavior?
Well, that's an interesting question. Most fires are human caused by accident or by arson and or through our equipment like electrical lines or vehicles. All those things could get cleaned up. But we do have other, we can't foresee every accidental ignition, and we can't preclude lightning ignitions. So, I can't erase fire from the environment. So that's a really interesting question. I think people are looking at that as, that was sort of the intention around Smokey the Bear, is reduce ignitions. But where'd that get us?
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's one from Monty Schmidt, and I know this name. He's running for the Municipal Water District Board and for San Rafael. And his question is, with all the actions that we need to take to increase wildfire safety, what would you say are the top 3 highest priority actions?
I think I walked through them. It really starts at home. It's being ready and aware of when you need to evacuate and to do it in a good way, a successful way. That's number 1. Number 2, make sure your house is less ignitable or not ignitable. And I'm not going to run through all the stuff that you can do, but there's a heck of a lot of stuff you can do, because we've learned by so many houses that have burned in the last 5 years. There's a lot of data about what you can do to improve your outcomes if a wildfire washes over your neighborhood. So that's number 2. And number 3, I would say, looking at neighborhood level vegetation management and including fuel reduction on the perimeter if you have a contiguous neighborhood. If you live out in the WUI where you just got one house out in the middle of nowhere, that third leg may not be as important. But for a lot of Marin, where we're cheek to jowl with house, And, we do have to depend on each other's vegetation management to support safety in the entire community.
Okay, so I have one last question from the attendees and then one of my own for you, and then we'll have to get ready to close. This comes from Michael. Could Mike mention the FIRESafe Marin Chipper program?
Sure. FIRESafe Marin has a lot more money due to Measure C and the MWPA, and they have chipper programs throughout the county. So this is where you can, in many cases, and this is a great thing since I don't have a pickup truck, you can thin your yard and take your cuttings and put it out front, and a company comes by and picks it up and chips it. So go to FIRESafe Marin. And a lot of these are happening through the organization of the FireWise community. So that you may be, if you have a FireWise community and you're in one, but you didn't know about it, you need to get on their mailing list, because you'll get notices from your FireWise community leaders about the next chipper day. I live in Fairfax. We've had 2 already this year, at least in my neighborhood, and 1 more is on the way. So it's a great thing. It's really, it takes away that barrier of, having to get a truck and haul your brush to the dump and pay tipping fees. It's a great boon. So please take advantage of it.
Here's the final question, and it's mine, Mike. What haven't we talked about tonight that you'd like to include?
Yeah, I forgot you were going to ask me that question.
Is there anything we missed?
Well, I think the main thing is what we learned during COVID is to keep sane. You need to get out and enjoy this beautiful place we get to live in. Man, we are so lucky. We have all these natural areas that we can walk out, in many cases, walk out our door and walk right into nature. And that's a valuable thing. And realize that the fire may come from nature, but it is the lifeblood of our existence, and we are so lucky to have it. So get out there, enjoy it, support it, and get inspired by it. That would be the thing that I left out.
I think that about covers it. Thank you so much for contributing your time and your wisdom and your experience for our membership and Friends Beyond. I want to encourage people to stay just a little bit longer, because Natalie's going to come on and she's going to supply you with some links and some other material so that you can continue to self-educate. But thank you all for joining us this evening. Mike, thanks again. And I look forward to seeing you all in January. I believe that's a wrap. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. And thank you so much, Mike. That was a really fantastic presentation. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we learned a lot tonight and have a lot to think about.
Can't see you, Natalie. Can't see you.
Sorry about that. I'll fix that right now. Hello, everybody. I'm Natalie Snorman, the new History Room librarian. I thought I would share just a quick screen if you have a moment, which is from our oral history collection, an interview with our own Deborah Schwartz here tonight, did in 2019 with retired firefighters Jeff Davidson and Michael St. John. And I thought that this was a really pertinent and really impactful quote from that interview, which is available on the Mill Valley Public Library's website through the History Room. And I really encourage you all to not only read the transcript, but to really listen to the interview as well. It's really emotional, and there's a lot of fantastic information that these 2 really impressive men provide in this interview. And this was a really important quote, I thought, from that. And one last slide, I'd like to share these links and resources that Mike and Deborah were nice enough to provide. And there's one at the bottom that was provided during the talk from one of our attendees. So I know that this is a lot of text, and I don't expect you all to start writing all of this down. And on that note, I'd like to share that this this event will be up on the library's YouTube channel tomorrow at some point. So be on the lookout for that, and we encourage you to share it with friends who couldn't make it tonight or just revisit it in the future. And with that, I think that about brings us to the end of the night. I'd like to thank you all for joining us and thank Deborah again and Mike for this really amazing evening. And I look forward to more events in the future.
Good night, everyone.